General Hospital Spoilers tease that Sasha has always known that being involved with Sunny Corinthos would expose her to risks, dangerous situations, unpredictable threats, and enemies lurking in the shadows, but nothing could have prepared her for the intense fear she now faces. The recent events, including the fire at Charlie's pub, have escalated everything. What began as a series of small, strange incidents surrounding her daughter, Daisy, has now turned into something far more sinister. With each passing day, it seems that Sasha's world is shrinking, and the danger is closing in on her from all sides. The fire at Charlie's pub was the breaking point for Sasha. She had always known that life in Sunny's world was dangerous, but she had never expected it to reach such a terrifying level. The fire, which could have easily taken Christina's life, was a clear sign that the enemies of Sunny's criminal empire were becoming more brazen, more willing to strike at the very heart of his family. The attack on Christina was a direct hit, and Sasha couldn't shake the thought that she and her daughter were next. As the smoke from the fire still lingered, Sasha's mind raced with the possibility that she was now the prime target of these ruthless enemies. She had become too closely connected to Sunny, too visible in his world, and now there was no escaping the consequences. Sasha's panic was immediate and all-consuming. For the first time, she truly felt like a target, like someone who was no longer safe. Despite the protection of her powerful connections, she couldn't sleep, couldn't stop looking over her shoulder, waiting for the next threat to strike. It wasn't just the physical danger she was afraid of, it was the emotional toll it was taking on her. She had built a life for herself, one that included her daughter Daisy, and she was terrified of losing it all. The idea that her daughter might be taken from her, or worse, harmed, was a thought that sent shivers down her spine. Sasha had always prided herself on being strong, but now, she felt utterly helpless. The world she had entered when she became involved with Sunny was a world of power, yes, but also a world of constant threat. She had always tried to shield Daisy from the darker side of her life, but now, there was no escaping it. The danger was too real, too close, and no amount of wealth or status could protect them from the vicious enemies who were closing in on them. It was a constant, gnawing fear that took over every aspect of Sasha's life. She could no longer ignore the fact that she had put herself, and her daughter, directly in the path of danger. It wasn't just the fire at Charlie's pub that had set Sasha on edge. There had been a series of other strange events leading up to it. Daisy's crib had been tampered with, her phone had mysteriously turned on, and there had been times when Sasha found her daughter in odd situations, facing the wrong way in her crib, wearing clothes that didn't match. These occurrences had started out small, easily dismissed as coincidences, but as they piled up, they began to feel more and more like a deliberate pattern. Sasha had tried to push aside the nagging fear, but it had been growing harder and harder to ignore. Each new event felt like a warning, a signal that something was terribly wrong. And then there was the looming threat of Jen Sidwell. Sasha couldn't help but suspect that he was involved in all of this. After all, he was already a suspect in the attack on Christina. The more she thought about it, the more it made sense. Sidwell had a personal vendetta against Sunny, and anyone connected to him, especially his granddaughter, would be a prime target. The more Sasha considered it, the more she realized that her connection to Sunny made her, and Daisy, vulnerable. It was a cruel reality she had to face. She was no longer just an innocent bystander in the world of crime, she was now a target, too. In her desperation, Sasha turned to the one person she knew she could rely on, Jason. Despite all the chaos and danger surrounding him, she knew Jason would always have her back. He was Sunny's right-hand man, his godfather, and the one person who had always been a steady presence in her life. Sasha had seen how Jason had been able to protect those he loved, and now, she hoped he would do the same for her and Daisy. The stakes were higher than ever, and Sasha couldn't afford to take any chances. She needed Jason's help, she needed his promise that Daisy would be kept safe. When Sasha reached out to Jason, she was overwhelmed with emotion. The weight of her fears, the terror of the unknown, all seemed to crash down on her at once. She pleaded with Jason, her voice shaking, as she asked him to protect Daisy. Jason's calm demeanor did little to ease her anxiety, but his words were reassuring. He promised her that he would do everything in his power to keep Daisy safe. That he would make sure nothing happened to her. But as Sasha looked into Jason's eyes, she couldn't help but wonder if even he could protect them from the storm that was brewing. The world they were living in was more dangerous than ever, and even Jason, who had faced down countless enemies and survived the most treacherous situations, couldn't promise her absolute safety. Their conversation was charged with an underlying tension, as both of them were fully aware of the stakes. Jason's promise to protect Daisy was sincere. But Sasha couldn't shake the fear that it might not be enough. She knew how ruthless the enemies of Sunny's world could be. And she feared that no one, no matter how strong or capable, could keep them safe forever. The situation had reached a boiling point. And Sasha was forced to confront the terrifying reality that she might be in too deep to escape unscathed. But as Sasha and Jason talked, something shifted. Jason's presence, his unflinching loyalty, gave her a sense of comfort, a small glimmer of hope in the midst of the chaos. Sasha had always been a strong, independent woman, but in that moment, she realized just how much she needed Jason's support. The world they lived in was one of constant danger, but in that room, for the first time in a long time, Sasha allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could survive it together. As Sasha left the conversation with Jason, she still couldn't shake the feeling of impending doom that hung over her. The threat was still very real, and the danger was only escalating. But for the first time, she felt like she wasn't completely alone in this fight. Jason had promised to protect Daisy, and she was holding on to that promise with everything she had. The uncertainty of the future still loomed large, but Sasha was determined to do whatever it took to protect her daughter, and to survive the storm that was rapidly approaching. Sasha's fear, her desperation, and her hope all collided in that moment with Jason, creating a volatile mix of emotions that seemed to mirror the chaos of their world. The interaction between them was more than just a plea for help, it was a reminder that in a world filled with danger, the bonds between people were sometimes the only thing that could provide any sense of security. As the threat to her family grew more intense, Sasha knew that she couldn't face it alone. She had to rely on Jason, on the people who loved her, to help keep her daughter, and herself, safe. But in the back of her mind, she knew that no amount of protection could change the fact that the danger was only going to get worse before it got better. The madness of their world was closing in on them. And Sasha was left hoping that Jason's promise would be enough to keep them alive. Sasha had always known that the criminal world she was involved in was fraught with danger. But the increasing erratic behavior of Jens Sidwell had started to truly unnerve her. What had once been a relatively manageable situation with him had now morphed into something far more dangerous. Something unpredictable, and something that was rapidly escalating. Sidwell's actions were becoming increasingly reckless, more unpredictable, and, worst of all, personal. Sasha could feel the pressure mounting with every strange move he made, and the weight of the situation was beginning to settle on her shoulders like an unbearable burden. At first, Sidwell had been just another threat on the periphery of her life, a man who had his eye on Sunny's empire, someone whose business dealings were far removed from Sasha's immediate concerns. But as time went on, something shifted. Sidwell began to make bolder, more intrusive moves. He wasn't just targeting Sunny anymore, he was targeting her, her family, her life. The little signs of obsession, like the constant surveillance of her and her daughter Daisy, the cryptic messages, and the way he seemed to show up at the most unsettling moments, began to pile up. Sasha couldn't ignore it any longer. Sidwell's behavior wasn't just menacing, it was personal, and it was starting to feel like a kind of obsession that she had no way of controlling. Sidwell's obsession wasn't just limited to Sasha, it extended to her daughter Daisy as well. Sasha had tried to shield Daisy from the darker side of her life, but with each passing day, it seemed like the young girl was being pulled further into the mess that was her mother's world. Every time Sasha thought the danger might have passed, it was only replaced by another incident, a phone call from an unknown number, a strange figure lingering outside her house, or a message left at Charlie's pub. Each new encounter seemed like a sign that Sidwell was inching closer, waiting for the right moment to strike. And each time, Sasha felt more trapped, more vulnerable. The growing obsession with Sasha and Daisy left her feeling exposed in ways she hadn't before. She had always known that being close to Sunny came with its risks, but this was different. This wasn't just about the underworld politics that had shaped her life. This was about her and her daughter being targeted as pawns in a much larger game. It was a dangerous and unsettling realization, one that made Sasha question everything she thought she knew about safety and security in her world. Jason, always the stalwart protector, was the only one Sasha could turn to. As godfather to her daughter, he was bound to protect Daisy at all costs, but this situation was unlike any threat they had faced before. Sidwell's obsession was unpredictable, and Sasha knew that she couldn't just wait around for him to make the next move. If she was going to protect her family, she had to act. She needed a plan, she needed new strategies, new ways of thinking to deal with this growing threat. When Sasha turned to Jason, it wasn't just for reassurance, it was for action. The situation had reached a point where neither of them could afford to be passive anymore. They needed to think through every possible angle, anticipate Sidwell's next move, and ensure that Daisy was kept safe no matter what it took. Sasha couldn't help but feel that every time they thought they had a handle on the situation, something new came up, something more dangerous, more unpredictable. Sidwell was no longer just a criminal, he was an unpredictable force, a man who would stop at nothing to get what he wanted. The tension between Sasha and Jason in these moments was palpable. They were both under enormous pressure. And their bond, built on years of trust, was being tested in ways neither of them had anticipated. Sasha knew that Jason would protect Daisy with his life. But she also knew that Sidwell's increasingly erratic behavior meant that no one was truly safe. The calculated strategies they had relied on in the past seemed less and less effective as Sidwell's madness grew. Jason, always the planner, knew they needed something more. They needed to rethink their approach entirely. For Sasha, this realization was a turning point. She couldn't rely solely on the old methods of dealing with threats. Sidwell wasn't playing by the same rules anymore. The danger was no longer just a matter of physical protection. It was psychological, it was unpredictable, and it was personal. They needed to adjust their thinking, to approach this new threat from a completely different angle. It wasn't just about surviving Sidwell's next move, it was about finding a way to outmaneuver him before he could strike again. Sasha's fear was compounded by the constant pressure she felt to protect Daisy while maintaining some semblance of normalcy. The safety of her daughter had always been her top priority, but now, with Sidwell's behavior becoming more and more irrational, she was forced to face the reality that Daisy's safety wasn't guaranteed. Every day brought new worries, new uncertainties. The world that Sasha had once felt she could control was slipping away from her, and she was left grappling with the idea that she might not be able to protect Daisy forever. Jason, too, was wrestling with these same thoughts. He knew that no matter how much he promised to keep Daisy safe, he couldn't do it alone. They needed a strategy, a plan, and they needed to move quickly. Every second mattered. Jason's determination to keep Sasha and Daisy out of harm's way was unwavering, but he couldn't ignore the reality that Sidwell's obsession with them was growing stronger. Jason was beginning to realize that, despite all of his training and experience, Sidwell's erratic behavior had the potential to overwhelm even him. It was a sobering realization. One that made him more resolute than ever to protect those he cared about, but it also meant they had to act quickly. Time was running out. As Jason and Sasha discussed their next steps, it became clear that their plans would have to evolve. They could no longer rely on the same methods that had worked in the past. Sidwell's madness had changed the game entirely. And they needed to be just as unpredictable as he was. Their new strategy would have to be as fluid and adaptable as the threat they were facing. This wasn't just about survival, it was about outsmarting someone who was becoming more dangerous with every passing day. Sasha couldn't shake the feeling that they were constantly reacting to Sidwell. Always one step behind. But now, with Jason by her side, she began to feel a glimmer of hope. They had always been able to weather storms together, but this one felt different. It felt more personal. More dangerous, and it was clear that Sidwell's obsession wasn't going to stop until he had achieved whatever twisted goal he had set for himself. The interactions between Sasha and Jason were becoming more intense as they worked together to formulate a plan. There was no room for mistakes, no time for hesitation. They needed to think through every detail, every possibility. Jason's mind raced through the options, while Sasha's instincts were sharp, driven by the need to protect her daughter. Together, they formed a plan that was as unpredictable as Sidwell himself, knowing that if they didn't act fast, the consequences could be disastrous. What was once a situation that Sasha thought she could control was now spiraling into something much more dangerous. Sidwell's obsession with her and Daisy was no longer just a threat, it was a full-blown crisis. But with Jason's unwavering support and their newly revised approach to the situation, Sasha began to feel a sense of control returning. The madness that Sidwell had unleashed was far from over, but Sasha knew that with Jason at her side, she wasn't alone in this fight. Together, they would do whatever it took to protect Daisy, and each other, from the storm that was coming for them. Sasha had always kept a tight grip on her past. The darkness that had once defined her life. The secrets and mistakes that had shaped her into the person she was today, were things she had buried deep inside. She had built a life for herself. One that seemed to be far removed from the chaos and pain of her earlier years. But now, as the dangers surrounding her and her family grew more intense, Sasha couldn't escape the realization that her past might not be as far behind her as she had hoped. The increasingly erratic behavior of Jen Sidwell had started to bring the ghosts of Sasha's past to light, and she couldn't shake the feeling that the two were somehow linked. It wasn't just that Sidwell was becoming a bigger threat, it was the way his actions seemed to reflect the same kind of darkness that had once consumed Sasha. She had no proof. No concrete evidence to tie him to her past, but the way he was maneuvering around her, the way he was obsessed with her and her daughter Daisy, was starting to feel like a twisted mirror of the life she had once led. As Sidwell pushed further into her life, Sasha felt herself being pulled back into a world she had desperately tried to leave behind. The more Sasha thought about it, the more she began to realize that the changes happening in her life weren't just about her connection to Sunny's world. There was something about Sidwell that struck a nerve, something familiar. Something dangerous that she couldn't quite put her finger on. And with each new twist, Sasha's fear grew. She had tried to keep her past buried. But now it seemed like it was coming back to haunt her, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. As the pressure built, Sasha finally reached a breaking point. Sitting in front of Jason, her voice trembling, she knew that the time had come to confess the truth. Jason had always been there for her, a constant support, but now, as the darkness of her past began to close in, she realized that she couldn't hide it any longer. The fear of losing everything, the fear of what Sidwell might do, was overwhelming. Sasha took a deep breath, and in a quiet, pained voice, she began to confess the painful truth about her past, a past that she had hoped would stay buried forever. The confession was raw, unfiltered, and filled with shame. Sasha revealed the parts of her life that she had spent years trying to forget, the mistakes she had made, the choices that had led her into a world of danger and deceit. There were things that she had never told anyone, things that, if they came to light, could ruin everything she had built. She spoke of the dark paths she had walked down, the people she had crossed, and the consequences of her actions that had followed her for years. Sasha knew that opening up to Jason was a risk, one that could change everything. But in that moment, she realized that keeping the truth hidden any longer would be a far greater danger than exposing it. Jason listened in silence, his expression unreadable as Sasha recounted the darkest chapters of her life. He had always known that there was more to Sasha than what she had let on. But hearing it all laid bare before him hit him like a punch to the gut. The realization that the woman he had come to trust and care for had such a troubled past was a shock. But it was also a sobering reminder of the kind of world they were living in. Sasha's past, her mistakes, had put her and Daisy in more danger than anyone had realized. Jason's shock was evident. Not just from the depth of Sasha's confession, but from the understanding that this wasn't just about the present danger they were facing, it was about the way the past was now bleeding into the present. Sidwell's obsession with Sasha wasn't just about his vendetta against Sunny, it was personal. The patterns of his behavior, the way he was stalking and harassing her, seemed to echo the very same chaos and destruction that had once surrounded Sasha in her previous life. It was a terrifying thought. Could Sidwell have known about her past? Was that what had drawn him to her, or was he simply taking advantage of her vulnerability now that he had her in his sights? For Jason, the revelation was a wake-up call. The stakes had always been high, but now they felt higher than ever. Sasha's past was not just something that had shaped who she was, it was now directly tied to the danger they were facing. Sidwell's actions, his obsession with Sasha, were no longer just random attacks, they were a calculated move, a way of leveraging the very thing that could destroy her. And the more Jason thought about it, the more he realized just how much danger they were all in. If Sidwell was truly targeting Sasha because of something in her past, then this was far more than just a fight for survival, it was a fight for redemption. Jason's mind raced as he processed what Sasha had confessed. He had always known that the world they were in was dangerous, but hearing the details of her past made the stakes feel even more personal. Sasha wasn't just a victim of circumstances, she was caught in a deadly game with a man who had the power to destroy everything she held dear. Jason's loyalty to her, his promise to protect Daisy, was more important than ever. But he also knew that protecting her would require more than just physical strength. It would require understanding the depths of the danger they were facing and using that knowledge to outsmart Sidwell at every turn. As Sasha's confession settled into the air between them, she could see the shock in Jason's eyes. He had always been her rock, the one person she could count on, but now, the weight of her past was on his shoulders as much as it was on hers. The truth about her past had shifted everything. What had once been a clear-cut situation, protect Daisy, stay one step ahead of Sidwell, was now tangled in the complexities of Sasha's history. Jason couldn't just protect her from the present danger. He had to protect her from the consequences of everything that had come before. Sasha's admission was the catalyst for a shift in their strategy. Jason now understood that the threat they were facing was not just a simple matter of survival, it was a matter of understanding the intricate web of connections and mistakes that had led them to this point. The danger wasn't just in the present, it was embedded in the past, in the choices Sasha had made and the enemies she had created along the way. The more Jason thought about it, the more he realized that they needed to change their approach, that they needed to adapt to the reality of their situation and the forces that were closing in on them. Sasha's world had always been one of calculated risk, but now, with the revelation of her past, it was clear that the stakes were higher than ever. The past and present were colliding in ways that neither she nor Jason had expected. The shock of Sasha's confession had thrown everything into turmoil. But it also gave them the clarity they needed to move forward. Now, more than ever, they needed to act fast, to outmaneuver Sidwell, and to protect Daisy from the storm that was rapidly approaching. The truth was out, and with it, the real danger was only just beginning.